quote says, "No matter what anyone says to you, what you're saying to yourself ultimately reigns supreme." Your brain is a powerful tool. By understanding how your brain works, you gain an amazing advantage, especially when it comes to achieving your goals. Instead of fighting your natural instincts, you work with them. In order to do this, you must first understand how the brain works. Over the past 100 years, scientists have established a fairly in-depth model of how the brain works. Ever since the discovery of the brain, humans have been fascinated by arguably one of their most important organs. We're going to take a moment to imagine our brains. Let's make fists with both our hands and bring your palms and the middle knuckles together. This is about the size of your brain. The total surface area is about the same size, I would say, as a single to 2 pages of newspaper, but it's folded and wrinkled, which allows it to fit inside your skull. The brain is made up of cells known as neurons. These connect to each other through axons, which make a vast web of linked cells. So think of neurons as if they were homes in the woods. If you walked back and forth between those two homes long enough, you'd form a path. The more you walked that path, the more defined it would become. In this analogy, the axons are like the path that connects those two houses. But then a new neighbor, picture this, builds a house near those two houses. So you decide to go visit that house. A path will then form between the 3 houses. Eventually, you may decide to build a little walking path with gravel to make it more permanent. Someday, you might decide to pave that path and make it a road. Soon, there are a dozen houses connected by a street. Then someone discovers there's a neighborhood nearby, and a road is built between those 2 neighborhoods. Then eventually it turns into a city, and that city is connected to others by a highway. As more traffic starts to flow between the houses and the cities, an infrastructure will be built in order to make traveling easier. Connections between your neurons happen in a similar fashion. How do thoughts form and work? May be a question you ask. Thoughts are like a phone call going from one house to another. An electrical signal is passed between the neurons that are responsible for that thought. The brain always tries to be efficient. So every time two cells in the body communicate, the brain will make it easier for them by simply creating a connection between them. Technically, your brain does this by building what's called a myelin sheath around the axon, which encourages the transmission of the electrical signal. The more that thought happens in your mind, the constant repetition, the more the sheath is built up, and the easier it is for the electrical signals to pass between those two cells. When it becomes easier for those two cells to communicate, the easier it is for you to have the same thought in the future. That's why we are told through research that we have 50 to 70,000 thoughts in a day, and most of those thoughts are repetitive in nature. The thoughts that we thought yesterday, weeks before, months, years before, and so on. The process is similar to the way a construction crew might add another lane to a highway to unclog a congested street. Each time you have a thought, it's like you're giving your brain's construction crew a signal that more thought traffic is coming through. So they prepare for this by building more infrastructures. In a sense, this is how a habit is formed. For example, when you were a child, you were most likely told to brush your teeth at a certain time. Your mother or father may have said, "It's bedtime, go brush your teeth." Your mind registered that sentence and turned it into a thought. Now, every time you think it's bedtime, you have to go brush your teeth. You relate those two things together, and they have formed a thick pathway in the brain that would be very difficult to undo. This is a good thing for good habits, of course, but not such a good thing for bad habits. However, no matter how thick a neural pathway is, it can be broken. By applying your knowledge of how the brain works, bad habits can be replaced with good ones. What is neuroplasticity? Researchers have discovered that throughout our lives, the pathways between neurons are always growing and changing. The ability for your brain to change and grow is called neuroplasticity. When you practice thinking in a new way or learn something new, your brain cells will rearrange themselves to serve that thought process in the future better. No matter your mental state or how old you are, you can change the structure of your neural pathways and improve your thought process. So how are thoughts affecting your productivity? You may ask. Our thoughts are catalysts for repeating cycles. What we think influences how we feel, which in turn affects how we behave. Therefore, if we have the continual thought that we are a failure, for example, then we will feel like a failure. And then we will start to act like a failure, which will reinforce the idea that we are a failure. This happens a lot in life. Perhaps you feel you're not good enough to advance in the technology industry. So when you assume you're not good enough to advance, this leads you to feel discouraged. And in turn, you will put in less effort at work. This lack of effort prevents you from advancing in your career. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. Once your mind draws a conclusion about you, then you're likely to do two things. First, you look for evidence that supports your belief. And second, you don't pay attention to anything that is contrary to your belief. A person who develops the belief that they won't advance in their career will view every mistake they make as proof they're not good enough. When they do succeed at something, they will believe they're lucky rather than capable. Consider that it might not be your lack of skills or talent holding you back from achieving your goals. Instead, it could be your beliefs that keep you from performing at your best. Creating a positive outlook will lead to better results. Not to say a positive thought has magical powers, but an optimistic thought will lead to more productive behavior, which will increase the odds of obtaining a successful outcome. In short, your mind is always thinking, and if it's always thinking positive thoughts, then you are more likely to succeed. To think more positive thoughts, you need to become aware of what you're thinking, consciously aware, and be more disciplined in what neural pathways are created. In addition, learn to constantly embody the feeling of your wish or desire fulfilled. This will cause more of the thoughts you desire to be in more abundance.